The title of my slam is Effective Academic Writing in 11 Minutes. And the first two people I mentioned this title to, they said, what, 11 minutes? Why not 10? And I said, well, that's the point, you see, okay? So let me get started right away, otherwise I won't be done in 11 minutes, probably need 13 or 15. Good. The subtitle is, what does your academic reader expect and why does that matter? Because the paper or thesis that you're going to write is an academic paper, which you submit to an academic reader, and that reader will have certain expectations. The first expectation is that you have understood the goal of academic writing. And that goal, as the APA manual says, is the clear communication of research, right? And I've just posted the Webster's Dictionary of American English's definition of research, which you can just read quietly with me. It's the investigation or experimentation aimed at the discovery and interpretation of facts, or the revision of accepted theories of laws in the light of new facts, or the practical application of such new or revised theories or laws. And I think it helps to understand the basic terms here, namely academic, i.e. in a university context, and research, as explained there. And we'll keep that goal of academic writing in mind. We'll come back to that at the very end. The next thing that your academic reader expects is a clearly delimited research question. A question that contributes to solving a practical or theoretical problem. Because there's no point in writing a paper that asks a question about a problem that the research community or your supervisor or lecturer doesn't consider worth solving, right? It sounds obvious, but the implication is that you need to establish, particularly in your introduction, you need to establish how the question you're asking derives from the problem you're trying to solve. The next expectation is, well, how can we clearly delimit our research question? This is something that we see in writing consultations, probably as I'm speaking right now, that all of us struggle to delimit our questions, not just beginners, okay? So at the Writing Lab, we use a tool, or we recommend a tool. It's a tool developed by Wayne Booth and his colleagues in a book called The Craft of Research, published in 2016, which they call the three-step formula for developing a research question. It goes in 3 steps. What's the topic? What is the question? And why does that question matter? And we tend to say that you're not ready to write or start writing your paper if you are unable to complete the 3-step formula. It's one way of testing whether you've actually worked out in sufficient detail and with sufficient accuracy whether the question you're asking is one that matters and one that is actually worth pursuing. Okay. An important technique, if you ask a question, is to question that question, which means why this research question and why not another? Sometimes in writing consultations, students come along, they have maybe 3, 6, 9. I've had people with 12 research questions, and they ask me, well, which one should I write about? My first question is, well, let's look at these questions separately. Ask yourself, why are you asking this particular question and not another one, which of course is another way of actually distinguishing questions from each other. And one way of testing whether a question is actually why you're asking a particular question is, well, why does this question matter? And matter to whom? In other words, matter in terms of solving the problem that you've asked, which is a problem that the research community or your supervisor cares about, including yourself, obviously. What insights will answering the research question generate? Okay, is it worth asking this question in terms of the output. In other words, does it produce enough knowledge that is worth having, or not? Important question is, when we do research, we engage in a research conversation that in certain fields has been ongoing for decades. And the idea is, and it's not just an ideal, it's also very practical. We need to ask ourselves, how will answering the question that we're asking, how will that contribute to existing research? In other words, to advance understanding of the problem that we've identified as worth solving. One way of testing whether the paper I'm writing and the question that I'm asking are actually worth thinking about is, well, if you didn't write this paper, if you didn't ask this question, what would your academic reader, what would they miss out on? What would they never find out about the topic? And then you would say, well, if I don't write this paper, they will not understand X, Y, and Z. Would that make a difference? Well, yes, it would, because, and you're already engaging in what we call argumentation. Your academic reader expects a critical engagement with existing research. What are its achievements, limitations, gaps, and research opportunities? And this brings me to an important aspect of the word, a critical engagement with existing research. Very often we see in papers that the author is just quite happy to take existing research at face value, to leave it unquestioned, because it just quite conveniently supports or substantiates a point I wish to make. One thing that we see sometimes is that people say, well, researchers frequently or have done this, that, and that, and then you discover that, well, at the end of the sentence there's one source. One source cannot account for a plural researchers or for plural existing research. So a critical engagement with existing research requires a critical reading of sources. Here I've developed a small tool, very practical, namely a tool for taking critical notes. And I've done this because one of my working assumptions is, and as you know, we tend to worry about plagiarism, that plagiarism actually begins with how we read sources. That we take ideas from other research without acknowledging, without giving credit to those sources. So here you have a tool that basically it serves as it's a list of prompts. It's a list of prompts. And of course, today, prompting has become quite fashionable. Prompting is actually trending in the context of, well, if you use ChatGPT, well, you need to prompt. The interesting thing about that is that we do it. Do we learn to prompt? It's just something we do, trial and error. I don't think we have a course on prompting ChatGPT yet. We might, I don't know. But anyway, it's what we consider part of AI literacy. Okay. What I find important here is that this tool gets you writing about sources earlier than you otherwise would. It's one thing to mark up, to highlight passages in a text when you're reading them. It's another thing to then translate and to transpose what you're highlighting and emphasizing into writing. So that if you took this seriously, you would basically write a critical note on every source that you consult and that potentially then becomes part of your research, and then might even sort of become part of your paper or thesis. Okay, I've just highlighted 2 points here. One is it's very important to identify why a source is relevant to my own work? Why is it relevant? If it's not relevant, why would you cite it? Okay, what makes it relevant? Relevant to answering the question. And the other point I've highlighted is at the very bottom. Well, which passages would be worth referring to or citing, and why? And why? Okay. This, of course, would be a topic for a 45-minute lecture, but I'll move on to the next expectation. Our academic reader expects us to use the best possible sources. And that best possible or best quality sources becomes, or is becoming such a crucial aspect of academic writing in the context of AI. Because, and I've underlined this point, AI-generated content is not academically acceptable. Why not? It's not human-authored. It's secondary. In other words, it's an interpretation. It's not peer-reviewed. It's not catalogued in any library. It's not verified. In other words, it hasn't been checked for its accuracy. It's not verifiable because you cannot check the output of ChatGPT or of any GPT because there's no indication of sources. Basically, the source is the internet. How do you check information that comes off the internet? And therefore, and it's also unstable. We could now prompt ChatGPT with the question, well, what is effective academic writing? We would get a response. If we prompted ChatGPT in 20 minutes' time, we get a different response. And the question is, well, which response would you then go with? So AI output, AI-generated content is unreliable for these reasons. So the point is, unless you're analysing AI output as data, and Karina, in one of your emails to me, you gave me a great example where you said, if, of course, you're writing a paper about application letters, if you're comparing application letters, AI-generated application letters versus human-authored application letters, and you want to analyse the differences in terms of tone, structure, forms of address, etc., and that is then your research topic, and you would ask a question, and according a relevant respective research question, that's a different matter. Okay, but as a source of information, AI-generated content is not academically reliable. So the point is, always use human-authored, primary sources, peer-reviewed, catalogued, verified, verifiable, stable, and reliable sources for those reasons. There's a very clear expectation in the academic world that we do that. Your academic reader expects rigorous methodology. He or she would expect you to explain, okay, which method you intend to use and why this method and not another. That is something that you need to justify your choice of methodology. Also in terms of every method has strengths and weaknesses. If you choose a method, why are you choosing it? Well, presumably because it has certain strengths and certain weaknesses. And you need to be aware of those. You would write about those in the method section where you would explain your data collection and data analysis methodology. You need, that's the next expectation, clear and coherent argumentation, because you want to provide proof, objectifiable proof in response to a question rather than relying on superstition, popular belief, or personal opinion. Argumentation is the process of forming reasons, providing evidence understood as observable, verifiable facts, drawing conclusions from that evidence and applying those conclusions, again, to contribute to solving a problem or puzzle considered worth researching. Basically, an academic argument must consist of three core elements. In theory, there are five, essentially. I've just picked out the three most essential ones: claims, reasons, evidence. You have the guiding questions on the right-hand side. It's okay in an everyday conversation if we say, well, DH's is the best pizza delivery service in St.Gallen, if we're thinking about ordering pizzas. If you step into a research context, that is a claim, and the worst thing that can happen with a claim is if you don't substantiate it. If you have, in other words, what we call a baseless claim. Okay. Here's a fictitious example that I've written. This paper claims that DH's is the best pizza delivery service in St.Gallen. Why? Because I give a reason. And then again, if I don't provide any evidence, I don't have a research argument. If I provide the evidence, in this case, a particular study, this was never conducted, I invented this, one could say, well, you've provided one piece of evidence. Would an academic reader be satisfied with one piece of evidence? That is a different question, probably not. Okay. Our academic reader also expects a clear presentation of results. What have I found? A coherent discussion of those results. What do they mean in light of the research question and existing research? And these two steps are very often confused. Okay? People start talking about, or they start discussing the results without actually having presented them first and highlighting the most significant ones and the most relevant ones in answering their question. We're expected to talk about the conclusions and implications, and of course to talk about the limitations and outlook. You have the guiding questions there again. Our academic reader, and I'm zooming out already, and I'm zooming out in two steps. Our academic reader, as I said, wants us to communicate our research in the clearest possible way. And one of the things that I've done over the years, this is basically sprang from or has emerged from my work as a professional editor, is I've been thinking a lot about a construct which I call the ideal academic text. It uses at least in the English-speaking world, a very well-established paragraph structure called topic comment, which begins with a topic sentence. What do you want to talk about? And then you talk about it. When people give presentations, we have a very clear expectation that that is what they will do. Okay, I'm going to talk about X. Our reaction is, well, tell me more. Okay, the same in writing. I continue to be baffled how excessively long, very often the opening sentences of paragraphs are, where I'm basically struggling to find the idea that the paragraph is about, the main idea. So the construct basically is we use these kind of paragraphs, which are also in writing theory called evidence paragraph, because they enable you to provide evidence, to develop one main idea through 4 to 8 sentences per paragraph on average, each conveying one idea on average. The one idea per sentence principle is a tough one for writers because many writers tend to be ill-disciplined. But if you are able to convey one idea at a time on average, as frequently as possible, your text will flow much better because readers have less to process. The shorter a sentence, the easier it is to process. It doesn't mean, at least not in the English-speaking world, it doesn't mean if your writing is straightforward that it's not sophisticated. In other writing cultures, the opposite is true. In 16 to 25 words, it's very interesting that 16 to 25 words is a word count that is appearing in more and more APA refereed journals as a recommendation to writers, as a means of writing clear and concise English. That will give you a writing budget of 200 words per paragraph. What is the best test of the effective communication of research? Well, there's only one that I can think of, which is to read your writing aloud. We say, well, what does this sound like? This doesn't sound convincing, but we're looking at a text, we're reading it silently, but we never give it a voice. And the fact is that our voice never lies. If you read someone's writing to them, they will realize, oh, you sound clear or not, You sound concise or not. You sound coherent or not. You sound convincing or not. Finally, our academic reader also expects us to safeguard, to honour the principle of academic integrity. In other words, that we handle all our sources honestly and transparently. Which means we must cite every single source, human and electronic, clearly and correctly. This, in the AI context, requires an awareness of AI usage and its implications, and I refer you here to the directives of the Dean of Studies enacted on the 1st of August 2024, especially section 511 about written work. So, there is support, which is great. There is support before you submit papers. The Writing Lab is available. We provide various services, Tuesday help desk, individual consultations, writing workshops on the various aspects of academic writing, and also resources and tools on our community space, which you can sign up to by emailing our schreiben@uni.st.gallen.ch account. That was my attempt to talk about effective academic writing in 11 minutes. Thank you very much.